Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, I made a super creepy compilation of my favorite scary stories to help you sleep. In case you like the artwork you see now on screen, it's a new piece that I made recently and it is available at my shop as an original in a very affordable price and also as a print. Lately I've been doing a lot of smaller artwork since you guys told me that you want to buy some of my originals but you can't afford them. So I made these small pieces that are very affordable and personally, I believe that they're some of my best work so far. You can find the link for my shop below. But for now guys, grab your flashlight and follow me into the darkness. Yesterday, I was celebrating a family member's birthday when I received a call from an aunt of mine. I had not talked to her in probably 5 or so years, so I was quite surprised when I heard her voice on the other line when I picked up. She seemed off, like something was bothering her, so I asked what was wrong. This is what she told me. "Aunt Teresa, is everything okay? You seem, I don't know, off or sad or something." I asked a little concerned. "Kevin, I have to tell you something, and I know that you will believe me. I know you have had some paranormal things happen in your life, and I can't quite explain what is going on with me. It's really scaring me, so can you just listen for a minute?" she asked with sadness in her voice. "Of course," I said, retreating into my laundry room for some privacy. This is when she began her horrifying experiences. My friend Diane came over about a month ago. She seemed very distressed and told me she hadn't been sleeping well because something was happening to her in the middle of the night. She went on to tell me these terrifying events, and I have to admit, after she left, I felt a little creeped out to stay home alone. As much as I tried, I could not get my mind off from the things she told me. When it hit nighttime, I still didn't feel comfortable, so I decided to take a sleeping tablet to help me fall asleep. It worked, but not for long. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to an eerie silent house. I could hear the tick of my clock in the living room, but nothing else. I didn't feel like I was alone, but deep down, I knew. It was just from what Diane had told me earlier, so I rolled over to try and get some more sleep, and that's when I first noticed it. There was a heavy pressure on the other side of my bed, like someone was laying next to me. Bill was obviously long gone, and I don't live with anyone, Kevin. No animals or anything. This sent ice-cold shivers down my spine, and my heart was racing so bad I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I let out a little squeal as the tapping surprised me. It was after that tapping that my fears were confirmed. I felt the bed lift as whatever it was got out of my bed. Then the soft snuffle of very strange sounding footsteps leaving my room, like they were slowly dragging their feet. I laid there and started weeping because I was beyond terrified. I thought whoever it was had left, so I slowly picked my head over at my door to see if I could see anything. At first, there was nothing, just my dark living room with a slight glow from the street lamp outside. Then I saw it. It ran very quickly past my bedroom door toward my kitchen. It was huge, maybe 7 feet tall, I don't know. I could hear my aunt's voice shaking at this point. Then he ran again, back the other way. I was paralyzed in fear. It looked like he had his arms behind him, like he was running too fast, and his arms could not keep up, just dangling behind him. They were very long too. I slowly covered my head, and tears were running down my face. I was so scared. Then I heard the same shuffling of that thing coming back into my room. The pressure came back on my bed as he laid back down next to me. I was so afraid I didn't move. The exhaustion from the adrenaline must have kicked in, because next thing I know, I wake up and it's morning. I slowly looked next to me and there was nothing at all. I felt a little relieved, so got out of bed and for some stupid reason, I chalked it up to be a very vivid nightmare. After all, these things really don't happen to people. Around 6:30 p.m., I felt tired again and relaxed on my chair and eventually dozed off watching television. I woke up and it was in the middle of the night. I looked at the clock on my living room and once again it was about 2 in the morning, and immediately all of the events from the prior night came racing back to my head and I sat there in silence. That's when I noticed the TV was off. I was sure I had left it on, but wasn't entirely sure, so I tried to calm myself. All I could think was how quiet it was, and that once again something felt very wrong. That same tapping noise from last night, and I knew, somehow just knew, not to move or make a sound. I hear my bed creak, and that same shuffle noise as it came into the living room with me. I kept one eye slightly open and looked into the reflection of the TV, and I could not believe what I saw come out of my room. It was huge, Kevin. Just like the night before, it stood there and looked over my way, before it took off and ran to the kitchen. Then it came back into the living room and once again back to the kitchen. This was ungodly terrifying. After a few laps, he stopped a little way behind my chair and I could see him in the reflection of the TV, taking these giant exaggerated tiptoe steps right up to behind me. He smelled so awful, like a dead deer carcass. In the reflection, I seen him get right up to about an inch from my eye and smile his nasty, disgusting grin at me. He knew I was awake and knew I was watching him. 2 more nights, he joyfully whispered. Then he slowly shuffled back to my room and I heard the bed creak again as it laid back down. I stayed up the whole night, jumping at every board creaking or any noise whatsoever. It was the longest night of my life. When it finally came to morning, I jumped up and called Diane as quickly as I could. She began to sob and apologize repeatedly to me. I asked why she was apologizing, and she told me that the reason I was experiencing this is because of her. If you tell someone of this thing, it can sense it, passes it on, and it leaves you alone until it gets bored. Then it will come back. I am so sorry, Kevin, that I told you this, but I didn't know what else to do. She began crying again at this point. I asked her why the hell she would tell me this, and basically she says she can't live in this fear and that all I would have to do is tell someone about it and I should be fine. I honestly don't believe this is a real thing, but also I work 3rd shift, so at night I'm gone anyway. I do apologize if this is real and I somehow passed the curse. If it is real, just pretend you're asleep and pray. You will be fine. I should have never started a YouTube gaming channel. I was just looking for a good outlet to have fun and interact with others, but the others weren't exactly what I had in mind. It all started innocuously enough. I finally got myself some equipment good enough to make some gaming footage for YouTube, so I started recording myself playing various indie games. One of the games I first uploaded is called The Binding of Isaac. In this game, the protagonist, Isaac's mother, hears a voice that is willing her to kill her son. Isaac escapes death by his mother through a crawl space on his floor. He ends up in his basement, which resembles the depths of hell. He then has to battle through various enemy types using his tears and power-ups along the way. Anyone who has played enough video games can probably relate to what I am going to talk about now. But there is something very different and unsettling about what happened to me. When you play a game for an inordinate amount of time, the visuals of the game seem to follow with you at the end of the day. I would often finish playing the game and then find the visuals sparking behind my eyelids, as I would try to sleep at night. If you watched some of the gameplay, you can imagine the type of dreams I was experiencing. I was okay with these dreams because they were typically fleeting, and were obviously a result of my focus on the content. Also, the content is morbid, but silly at the same time. The art style is not lifelike, and the game has a fun and adventurous feeling to it. The past few days, things started getting strange. I would make a video, edit it, and save it. When I would try to view the final product after saving the video, would be blank with lots of static. I tried isolating some of the video sounds, but the static was just too much. I may be crazy, but I definitely heard faint voices among the static, but I couldn't find anything definitive. I chalked this up to a software issue. When I would resave the video, it would format correctly. The only time before last night that I got freaked out was when I stayed up late working on the Escapists indie video game. I finished editing the video and saved it to the videos folder file I usually do. I went in and opened the video, but to my surprise, it wasn't the Escapists. It was Binding of Isaac footage. I watched the cartoonesque images start to transition into lifelike settings, and suddenly it felt familiar. It was my dream from the night before. The video was a point-of-view perspective of me opening a closet in the corner of a cement basement. I opened the door and suddenly I'm looking at a huge creature huddled in the corner of the closet. It was pale flesh with long thinning black and white hair all over its body. Its head it turned away and pressed up against the wall. In the video, you see me backing up, and as I start to close the door, the creature turns its head towards me and it reveals its blood-soaked lips. The creature's head cocks to the side as its black eyes, filled with bright light that started to illuminate the walls of the closet. In the dream, I remember turning around and running, but the video showed the creature's lips peeling back. Next thing I know, I'm waking up at my computer desk. The rays of sunshine escaping through my blinds jolted me back to reality. Did I really just dreamt about this? That sentence confuses even me, but it felt so real. This is when I started to question what I was doing with my free time. After this equally scary and odd occurrence, I took a break from playing and recording. I had plenty of footage saved to upload, so I spent the next few days reading and writing. I just needed to calm my brain down. At this point, the eerie dream had almost escaped my memory. After kissing my fiancé Jerry goodbye, before she went to work the night shift at her job, I went to bed. I believe I fell asleep around 9:30 p.m. I remember waking up to the sound of talking, coming from my computer room. My eyes opened and focused on the giant digital numbers on my alarm clock, blinking. I grabbed my phone and saw that the time was 12:47 a.m. At this time, The sounds of a keyboard clicking was drilling into my head. Annoyed, I sat up, and when the realization that someone was in the other room on my computer, I froze in fear. I have a cat, but the typing noise was discernibly that of a human's. Could my fiancé have skipped out at work? I then heard a growling, hissing, "Yes," sound echoing through the darkness of my room. This sent an avalanche of chills down my spine that settled in my stomach like a jar of dead butterflies. The memories of the dream started to creep into my psyche. The rational part of my brain started trying to rationalize what was happening. It's probably Jerry. Or maybe you just left the computer on and the cat jumped up and started some video you were watching before bed. Maybe you're just half asleep and are imagining things. That growling yes noise was probably just the cat hissing at something he saw at the window. I sat listening to the tapping noise in the claustrophobic warmth of my room while letting these thoughts pour through my head until I decided to text Jerry. I asked if she stayed home. About 2 minutes later, a text came in that said she was at work. I texted her back saying I just had a bad dream and not to worry. I mustered up the courage to see what was making the typing noise. So I sat up abruptly, causing the bed mattress to creak and the headboard to rattle against the wall. In this very instant, the typing noise stopped and I heard what sounded like my computer chair swing around. This had a distinct sound because the bearings had been going out of the swivel for a long time. I rationalized this by thinking my cat must have sprung from the chair after it was startled. I made my way into the living room in view of the computer room. There was monitor light leaking into the hallway from the partially open door of my computer room. I noticed at this time that I was hardly breathing, so I forced myself to take a few breaths. I thought to myself, "Get a grip, Eric. It's nothing, you idiot." I laughed a little at my paranoia and made a hasty approach to the door. I just wanted to get in there and see what the hell was freaking me out so much for no reason. Just as I reached out to push the door open, it slammed shut in my face. I stood there stunned and confused. Then, that eerie feeling of "you need to get the fuck out of here right now" set in. I slowly cowered away from the door while never taking my eyes off the handle. I wanted to run. I wanted to cry. I wanted to yell out, but I could not. My back finally came to rest on a wall adjustment from the shut door of the computer room. My brain frantically tried to make sense of these events until it finally came to rest on the wind. "It's just the fucking wind, you dolt," I told myself. The air pressure differences close doors all the time when the windows are open. It's okay. It's just a coincidence. I made my way again towards the door with my newfound certainty, but my bones were moving my flesh along at a much slower pace. I was probably blue at this point, because I don't remember breathing since the door slammed in my face. I reached my arm out and grabbed the door handle. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I swung the door open and peeked inside while standing behind the pseudo cover of the door's frame. The computer chair was facing the door, and I could see that my video editing software was queued up on the monitor. At this point, I took the biggest breath of my life and almost started to laugh, when suddenly I felt something rub against my leg and almost did a backflip out of the room. I almost took off running, but then I came to find out it was my cat. He followed me in after I opened the door. "You bastard cat." At this point, I could not take much more. I was emotionally drained. I went and sat down at my desk. The keyboard looked as if my cat was using it. The editing software was blank, so I closed it out and was about to shut down the computer until I saw a video file in the top right corner of the monitor. I did not remember saving a video there. I hesitated for a few seconds, and then I double-clicked the file. Today, I have uploaded a short clip, unedited. The video shows a few moments prior to me opening the door to the computer room. The chair seems to be moving slightly. I do not know how to explain what you are hearing before I enter the room. There is some audible noises that have freaked me out. The best transcript I could make is, "Isaac? Yes, you caught me. Caught me. You caught me. My teeth are sharpened. No. God? Back home." You then see me open the door, sit down, discover the video, and then shut the webcam off. My question for you all is, what the hell? Could my cat have simply triggered my webcam? Or am I being pranked of my fiancé? I asked her about it, and she denies any responsibility. There is a part of me that feels whatever it was in the room last night wanted to record me, almost like it's playing a game. I was a curious kid growing up. From the day I learned the word why, I never stopped asking it. Why do I have to go to bed at 8? Why can't we go see Santa at the North Pole? Why are daddy's feet bigger than mommy's? The other ones, the what, when, how, and who questions, were not neglected either. Many questions were easily answered. Where does the sun go at night? And some, not so easy. Why is Uncle Greg always covered in bruises? At some point in every kid's life, they begin to fear monsters. How any kid even conjures the concept of a lurking monster is anyone's guess, and yet every child does. I'm sure each and every one of you can remember a time when you kept your closet shut because you were certain some unseen evil would snug you in the night. But not one of you can pinpoint the moment when you began to believe in the existence of such a thing. That is a question I've yet to answer. My monster du jour was the one under the bed. I feared the thing, and always made sure I had a stuffed animal on each side of me when I slept to guard me. Yet I was feverishly intrigued by it, for I never doubted the existence, but I wondered what it was doing under the bed. It was awfully cramped, so it had to come out eventually. What else did it go? Why was it afraid of teddy bears? I attempted to talk to it, but received no reply, and was reprimanded by my dad and told to go to sleep. So I decided to be brave. My mommy had always said, if you didn't know something, ask. So that's what I decided to do. Since it wouldn't come out to talk to me, I would go to it. Since I decided this was something I wasn't supposed to do, I waited until after they put me to bed to sneak underneath it. I decided, with my little kid logic, that light is the monster's weakness, and so I couldn't use any light to actually see it. I brought a flashlight, but I hoped to maybe get some of my other questions answered. I slipped under my bed, into the middle, and waited, and waited, and waited. I started to fall asleep, but was started awake by a hiss, very, very close to my ear. Then a gust of damp breath on my neck. The breath came out a dry, croaking rattle. Hiss, inhale, rattle, exhale. I'd gone in with every investigative intention, but at this crucial moment of truth, I abandoned all curiosity in the face of sheer terror. I went to turn on the flashlight, clenched in my hands, but froze. Or rather, my body was frozen. I could not move. A sickening pop sound, and something which I not realized had been pressed against my arm, shifted, It was as if something beneath the surface, or whatever was touching me, was moving. More cracks and pops, like I was trapped in a bag of popping corn. There was a grinding screeching of a fork being scraped across a plate of a dentist's drill. And then, light. My room was awash with light. My head was still turned to the side, still paralyzed in that awkward position, and I expected to see the face of a demon, nose to nose. Instead, I saw feet, with a familiar daisy tattoo around one of her ankles. Then my mom's voice. "What are you doing out of bed?" Worse and more baffling than a monstrous face could have been, a second set of feet entered my view. These ones much smaller. "I had a nightmare," a second voice replied. My voice! Only I didn't say it. It came from the other me, the fake whose feet I saw. I tried to tell Mommy, but I couldn't make my tongue move any more than another part of my body, and I found I couldn't quite figure out how to make my voice work. "Well, I suppose you can sleep with us, just for tonight," my mom said, and the two left, and I was once again in the dark. I grew hungry, but could not move, forced to endure a sore belly and headache, with no hint of relief. I was exhausted, but sleep never came. I saw my family, or at least their feet, often. I tried, but could not tell, could not be noticed. Even when they bent to peer under the bed, they looked beyond me, never seeing. The feet that would have been mine grew larger, and those of my parents wrinkled, Mom's tattoo fading. At some point, I stopped seeing my dad's feet, and then later, my mom's. My own, that of the other me, grew old, and they too disappeared. Then, all new feet, unfamiliar feet. The same two pair until a new set of feet joined, small feet, young feet. I waited there, for there was nothing else to do, until the child grew curious, as I had been, and I was finally granted freedom, and could live the life which had been stolen from me. When you are in a maximum security psychiatric ward, you are only allowed to have pencils and pens for a limited amount of time. I will write what happened as quickly as I can before they take my pen away. Please deliver this letter to anyone that will read it, as it is very important for everyone to know what happened before I am sent to prison. Thank you. On October 20th, 2015, something terrible happened. Let's start at the night before, on October 19th at 10:15 p.m. It was a normal night. I came home late from work and laid in bed and played with my phone like usual. I started to feel my heavy eyes drop, so I set my phone down and drifted to a calm sleep. But not for long. I awoke in the middle of the night with a feeling of something watching me. I looked around my room from my bed and saw nothing in the dark. I felt uneasy, like a feeling of dread. I was 19 years old, lived with my parents and baby brother, and to my embarrassment, I still suffered from nightmares. It was normal for me to have the feeling of being awakened by something not feeling right, and at first, I blamed it on this. I could not go back to sleep though. I also noticed that I could read my posters and I could read my bedside clock, which said 3:46 a.m. I remember hearing somewhere that you can't read in your dreams, although I have no idea how true that is. I wasn't dreaming, I was sure of it. I sat up and gave a small hello in the dark, and as soon as I heard my own voice, I felt silly. Nothing answered back except my own breathing. I just felt like something was in my room. I slid out of bed and went to check on my parents. mostly to make myself feel grounded or normal. I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy or that I wasn't getting an eerie feeling from an intruder in the house. I stepped downstairs and tiptoed down the hallway to my parents' room. I opened their door and it was so quiet, no breathing or shuffling or anything coming from their dark room. I let out a small, "Mom? Dad?" No answers, not even a frustrated sigh of being woken up. I tried again, a little louder this time. "Mom? Dad?" Silence filled my head and ears. I began to get that prickly feeling on my skin, like something was about to happen. Maybe something would jump out or yell suddenly. Worried, I reached for the light switch and blinked and shielded my eyes from the bright light. I gasped loudly from what I saw. My mother and father were laying both on their sides facing me. Both of them had their eyes wide open, more open than I had ever seen them. The whites in them were now a dull pink and glazed over. My legs backpedaled until I hit the opposite side of the hallway from their door. I could not take my eyes off of their dead stare. No blinking, no moving. I regained myself and slowly walked towards their bed. Were they dead? How could they be dead? They weren't dead. Both of their mouths cracked open in a unison. They let out a breathy whisper. "Hope you are ready." I realized I was sweating, and the sound of that breathy tone sounded like the air was being punched out of their bodies. I backed up again until my back slammed into the hallway wall. I didn't think. I just ran towards the front door of the house. I just needed to get out, to get away. I didn't know what was going on. I just wanted to leave. As I ran past the TV in the living room, I heard the familiar, like someone had turned the TV on. No one was in the room except me, and the remote was on the table where Dad left it last. I stopped in my tracks and stared into the slowly focusing on TV. I was terrified. My heartbeat deafened my own ears, but what I saw on the TV wasn't as disturbing as I was expecting. It was a man standing in a brightly colored suit. He had slicked hair parted down the side, and he held a few big cards in his hand. It seemed like a kid's show. There was no music or sound. He stared right into my eyes. He was holding me there with his gaze. His big bluish-green eyes shimmered, and he quickly flashed a somewhat friendly smile. He wasn't ugly or disgusting, but there was something off about him. He was standing in front of just a plain white background, which made the oranges and yellows and reds and blues of his suit seem even brighter. I watched as he grabbed the large cards in his hand, turned them so I could see what was on them. He held them up next to his head as the camera zoomed in, uncomfortably, until you could only see his face and the cards he held. They were the kinds of cards you would have for a child. They had a picture of an animal and the letter that the animal's name starts with. The first one read, E is for elephant. He flipped the next card. He was still smiling. F is for fox. He showed the next one. G is for giraffe. I didn't notice that his smile was growing as he was flipping. H is for hope. I was too scared to know what the next cards may say. Y is for you are. I held my breath. R is for ready. I shifted my eyes from the cards to his face and saw that his teeth were now showing in his smile. They looked too big for his mouth, and it seemed like his lips struggled to cover the molars on the side of his face. His smile grew so large that I thought his face would break apart from ear to ear. I broke from his gaze and fled to the front door. I tried every cliché that you see in horror movies to try to get the door to budge. I shook the handle. I bounced on the door. I even yelled and screamed for help, for anyone to hear me or help me. As my hands became raw and sore from the banging, I could hear a slight sound. The sound of shuffling cards behind my head. I could feel the wind of the cards on the back of my neck, and I stood still. I didn't want to exist. Not now. I didn't want to look. I felt like if I didn't look, he would not exist. Before I knew it, I realized I had not taken a breath for some time. I felt dizzy and hazy. Tunnel vision took over my eyes. The door fogged over with darkness, and I fell into a crumpled pile of the floor at the base of the door. I awoke the next morning to bright sun coming through my window and the sound of dishes clanking in the kitchen. I heard my mom and dad talking and laughing. I think my baby brother was still asleep. I could smell breakfast. Whatever that nightmare was last night, it was over now. Everything was normal and seemed bright. I went downstairs to find Mom and Dad in their robes with messy bed hair. Their eyes were normal. Mom turned to me and gave me a questionable look. "Are you okay? You look scared or something?" I mumbled to find my words. But what is going on?" My dad butted in. "You feeling okay? Did you have one of your nightmares?" I verbally processed it. "I guess I did." "Yeah, that's all what it is. I think I just stayed up too late." I went upstairs to my room, laughed at myself for being so gullible at my own mind. I hated to work and thought nothing more of what had happened. I came home late from work. I was exhausted and too tired to eat. Mom and Dad were in bed already, and the house was silent. I laid in bed in my clothes and fell asleep almost instantly. I gasped awake to a dark shadowy figure looming over me. The sound of shuffling cards filled the silence. I tried to move and noticed that there was a hand over my mouth and now another one over my eyes. The hand on my mouth slipped its thumb into the inside of my cheek and I clenched my jaw tightly so it couldn't open my mouth. The other hand lifted off my eyes and did the same to the other side of my mouth, and I laid there, stapled to the bed by the pressure of the hands pushing down, hooking into my inner mouth. Both hands started stretching my mouth until I thought my lips would tear. I screamed and opened my jaws to take the tension off of the pulling of my mouth. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just let them rip my mouth from ear to ear. One hand slipped in between my teeth and pushed hard down into my tongue and throat, and I started to gag and gasp for air. The other hand disappeared behind the figure. I couldn't see much of anything behind the tears in the dark of my room. It stopped plunging its fingers into my throat, and I heard a familiar breathy whisper. "Hope you are ready." I tried to squirm out of his hold, and the fingers just pushed harder and deeper into my throat and tongue. I thought for sure they would push out of the back of my head. I scratched and grabbed and pulled the arm attached to the hand. It was useless. The other hand returned with something very large, maybe the size of a cantaloupe. It started forcing the object into my mouth, and I tried to stretch my jaws open in order to save my teeth from snapping off from the pressure. My teeth scraped and tore at it. The pressure made my eyes bulge and the corners of my mouth tore as both hands now pushing downwards to force this thing into my mouth. I felt dizzy from not breathing and from the pain and was relieved by the feeling of passing out. I awoke with everyone normal once again. I could hear Mom and Dad downstairs, and the sun shined through the window again. My jaw ached slightly. I ran downstairs, but this time I was not welcomed in the same way. Mom turned to look at me and dropped the pan she was holding. She slowly fainted to the floor. My dad's mouth dropped open and his eyes were wide. I was confused. I moved my mouth to say, "What's wrong?" But all that came out was bloody garble. I spluttered blood on the floor and looked down to see. I was covered in blood. I looked at where I had spat and noticed a tooth in the puddle. I grabbed my mouth, too scared to look in the mirror. My mouth felt deformed and broken. I was too scared to ask what had happened. I was too scared to know why my stomach was stretched and full. I was too scared to know why my jaw was broken or why most of my teeth were broken. Lastly, I was too scared to know where my baby brother was. They say that my house is haunted. I haven't been living here for very long, but I know better that it isn't. That doesn't mean that kids, urban explorers, and ghost chasers don't still show up to investigate. Most of the time, they're surprised to see someone is now living in this house outside of town. Usually, especially with the more respectful ones, they apologize and ask if I've been witness to anything strange or paranormal. When I tell them that no, nothing strange happens, there is no ghost haunting the grounds, it's all just a fiction, they thank me and leave. On a handful of occasions, the bolder ones ask to see the inside. Depending on my mood, I've allowed it more often than not, assuming that once they see the furnished inside and nothing happens, they will spread the word and I can be left alone in the end. There was only 2 that caught me on a bad day, which resulted in me yelling at them for wasting their time and mine, and that I just want to live out the rest of my days in peace. So far, all of this has seemed to help me, although I am not sure if the anger has aided me more. Visits dwindled over the past year that I have lived here, and I haven't seen any thrill-seeking lurker on my property for a good 3 or 4 months. I still get odd looks when I go into town and hear the whispered conversations that they don't try hard enough to hide. The recent lack of strangers showing up is part of the reason I was mildly surprised a group of college-aged kids creeping towards the front door last night. I was walking from the kitchen into the living room. At first, I shook my head to myself, cursing adventurous young adults and teens for trying to scare themselves. If only they knew the true horrors in the world, then they might be less inclined to search for something that would make their hearts race. The flash of a memory burned briefly in my mind, and my frown turned into a small smile as I recalled how adventurous and ambitious I was once upon a time. Why not have a little fun with these youngsters then? There is no ghost here, might as well give them all a little bit of a scare. Quietly stepped to my front door and slide the lock out of place without making a sound. I didn't want to alert the outsiders to my presence just yet. I listened intently and waited as they neared the porch. I heard the wooden planks creak under the weight and talking about how it was too dark to see inside the windows. When I heard them, I twisted the handle and yanked the door open as fast as I could, while bellowing out, "What do you want?" I saw that there were 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl. I kept my smirk to myself as I mused for a second about the girl probably either trying to prove herself as one of the guys or being dragged alone, pressured by one or all of them. My mind quickly dropped that train of thought when 3 of the figures leaped from the porch and took a few hurried steps into the yard, putting some distance between themselves and what frightened them. Only one remained standing before me, the girl, her head raised in brave determination. "Sorry, sir, we didn't think anyone lived here." She spoke in a hesitant tone that grew stronger with each word. "Well, someone does live here," I responded carefully. The girl didn't answer, only stared at me, so I asked her, "Well?" "Penny, let's go!" One of the young men yelled after her. "Is your house really haunted?" she asked. ignoring her friend. "Penny, is it?" "No, the house is not haunted," I answered. "It's short for Penelope. Did you know that your house is believed to be haunted?" She continued. "Yes, Penelope, I did know that. Most of the brave kids such as you and your friends have discovered that already and made the conscious decision to leave me alone," I said. "I'm from out of town, so I guess I missed that memo," she responded. It sounded like it was accompanied with a smirk, but without any lights on her face, it was impossible for me to see it. "You are quite braver than your friends, it would seem. Would you care to come in for a cup of tea and a story? From my experience, not many know the full legend of the ghost that was assumed to haunt these walls. Of course, you probably won't believe the real story," I offered. Her silence told me that she was considering the offer. If she was smart enough, she would know that she shouldn't enter the house of a strange man. But then again, I knew better that many others and sometimes pride and curiosity can burn brighter than intelligence. I saw her silhouette turn as she yelled over her shoulder, "You go ahead, I'll catch up later." "Are you fucking kidding me, Penny? What if he kills you or something?" A male voice called back to her. It was a different one than the first I had heard. "Are you planning on killing me, or torturing me, or raping me or something?" Penelope asked, turning back to me. "I don't go around torturing and raping young women. How barbaric," I answered her. "I think I can handle myself," she hollered back to her friends. I stepped aside so she could enter the house. Once she was inside, she turned and waved to her friends. As I shut the door, I saw them shaking their heads, shrugging, and walking away. "Tea or coffee?" I asked my new guest as I locked the door and began walking to the kitchen. "I'd prefer coffee, if it's not trouble," she answered, following me. I led her into the modest room and flipped the light switch before gesturing for her to take a seat at a small table. She did, and I approached the counter, pulling a coffee maker towards me and fetching the grounds from the cupboard above. I scooped some of the dark granules into a filter, then I placed in the top of the maker. I filled the water and turned on the pot before taking a seat across from the young woman. I took a moment to study her. She had high cheekbones, but otherwise her features were soft. Brown hair fell to just past her shoulders, and her intense eyes, something not commonly found. "So, tell me, Penelope, what have you heard about this house?" I asked her as the machine on the counter began to heat up and make small gurgling noises. She shrugged. "Just that it's haunted. They say you can hear a woman crying loudly on some nights. They say it is heartbreaking." "And hearing a woman cry interests you?" She chuckled softly. "If it's coming from a ghost, sure. Anything for a glimpse of the other side." I mused aloud with a small smile. She shrugged. We sat in silence with the coffee finished making. I was surprised to note that she didn't look to be feeling as awkward as others in her situation might. Instead, she seemed rather calm and content. Within minutes, the mechanical pot stopped making gurgling noises, and I stood to pour some into the mugs. I placed one in front of her along with two small pots, one containing sugar and the other holding cream. I seated myself in a worn leather armchair, for as much as the dark fabric had been through, it still held itself together and supported my weight perfectly. I took a long sip of my own steaming black coffee, while Penelope took her place in another chair beside mine. Both chairs faced a fireplace that hadn't seen flames in a very long time. It was still comforting for me to be able to see the bricks that gave way to a dark and dirty space. Both chairs were angled so that the fireplace was easily the main focal point, but the inhabitants could also comfortably turn to see each other. I glanced at the young woman before reaching to the table between us and turning on the small lamp. It cast shadows about the room that would typically bring fearful thoughts to anyone. The woman wasn't typical, though. She was strong and unafraid. "Why do you think the woman would cry?" I asked my guest before beginning the story. She thought for a minute while sipping the hot liquid, then responded, "I'm sure everyone has their own theories, but I would assume that she lost someone dear to her, maybe a kid or a husband or something." "Ah, yes. Loss is a terrible thing. Losing someone of great importance to you can cause us sorrow and hurts unlike any imaginable torture. The pain of the heart is too much more potent than the pain of the body," I said, losing myself for a moment in thoughts of the one I had lost so long ago. Heartbreak and misfortune were no foreign to me. Instead, they had taken up residence in my soul and refused to leave. "So did she?" Penelope's voice brought me back to the present. I looked up to her from my blank stare pointed at the floor. "Yes, this house saw a woman lose everything, including herself. There was no child, though." "What do you mean, she lost herself?" she asked. For that to be answered, I must tell you the story itself. But first, one more question. "What do you know about werewolves?" One edge of my mouth curled up into a half smile, and as I looked at her over my cup before taking another drink, "Werewolves? They're humans that turn into a wolf with a full moon. Legends of them are found in various regions of the world. What if they were more than just a legend or a myth? Yes, depending on where you are in the world, there are different ways one might become a wolf. Who's to say what's the full truth or not? For the sake of this tale, though, I ask that you believe they are real and accept the information I give you without comment." I spoke. "Okay." She nodded slowly and trailed off. "Then, let me begin. Almost 2 long decades ago, there was a young man who lived far away from here. He was 18, stubborn, but mostly importantly, he was in love. The young lady his heart belonged to was beautiful, with long dark hair and bright eyes. Her name was Evangeline, and she loved him too. Her family kept a secret though, and because of this, they didn't approve of the young couple's dreams to travel. Evangeline knew this, and although she dreamed with him of distant places, her heart was always heavy with the thought she would never be allowed to join his adventures. One day, she finally shared her secret with him, and explained why she could not leave her home, like they were constantly imagining. The sweet angelic girl became a wolf during the full moon, every month. Unlike either breeds of the beast, she was not bitten or turned by choice. She was born into it. She explained to her love that there were different types of werewolves, some being made into what they were, and others, like herself, being cursed from their family's blood. For generations her family was careful to keep their secret from being exposed to the public. In an attempt to avoid becoming dangerous, they long ago decided to forget all the ancient traditions of feasting a human flesh. They learned that if they formed the diet to mostly be vegetable, they could better control their wolf side when it emerged. This aided them in being sure that they only hunted animals when near the wolf form. Over the years, there had been some mistakes, and if a wolf had the taste of human blood, they would become ravenous for it. A few times, the family had to put one of their own down because of this. As a result, her father was strict and wanted to keep her close until he died. He was afraid, terrified, that something might happen to his beautiful daughter. When Evangeline explained this to the young man, tears rolled down her face. She cried for what she was, for what she has no control over. She cried with the knowledge that the man would most likely leave her, whether he believed what she said or not. He had no reason not to believe her, and although skeptical, he held her close and kissed her head. The next full moon, he was allowed to be there when she changed. Unlike most tales, her family adored the young man and approved of their relationship, just not of their wanting to leave. Months went by, and he stayed true to her. She fell deeper into their love than she ever thought was possible. The night of her 18th birthday, he proposed, and she said yes. The wedding plans were hollow, while their families were excitedly helping them choose flowers and food. The couple was secretly planning to run away together. They loved each other with the depth of the deepest charm, and Evangeline knew that her husband would keep her safe. One night, her window was light open without a sound. Evangeline looked out and saw the lover of her life waiting there. She carefully and quietly gathered the bag she had packed and hidden under the bed, then climbed through the window. They stole away into the night, across the grounds of her family's home, down a side street, and then out of town in his car. Life on the run was thrilling at first. They covered their tracks and used fake names while making their way to their coastal destination. Often, she missed her family and wished there was a way to be there when her pregnant mother gave birth to her little sister. In those moments, her lover would gently squeeze her hand or pull her close, and with a deep breath of him, she would relax and remember that it had to be this way if they were to live their life together. She didn't just run away to be with him after all. She ran away to be free. For a year, they took their time crossing the country. They were in no rush to get to the coast and spent most of the time in different towns and seeing everything's wonders that they could. Before reaching their destination, they wanted to behold all the beauty on the way. Then, they would continue to do the same across the world. Greece, France, Egypt, China, South Africa, India, Iceland, and everywhere in between would be their home. Sadly, they didn't make it very far. I paused my story to look at Penelope between sips of her coffee. I could see that she was engrossed, and when I stopped, her eyes widened. "How far did they make it?" she asked, urging me to continue. I smiled and drained my mug before setting it on the table. They stopped at a small town, planning on saving up some money for a couple of months to be able to afford the cost of boat fare. They weren't to the coast just yet. They went to the courthouse with a kind older couple they were renting a home from as their witnesses. They stayed longer than expected. Perhaps it was being stationary for so long, or maybe Evangeline's feeling of homesickness or the loss of excitement in their freedom, that they began arguing on almost weekly basis. She missed her family, and in the year they had been gone, her sister had been born, and she had never been able to even lay eyes on her. After a particularly nasty bout, the young husband spent an evening at a local bar. While intoxicated, he ended up getting into a fight with a local man. They both kicked out of the establishment, and after punching the man hard enough to lay him on his back, he left to return home. Evangeline threw her arms around him when he walked into the door, and they apologized to one another. He hadn't even been gone that long from her, and her anger had subsided to worry, causing her to realize that she loved this man and was more afraid of losing him than fighting with him. They talked into the night and agreed to make a trip back to their hometown before leaving the country. They hoped that the time spent away would be proof to Evangeline's family that she could handle being gone and that she was okay. The night of the full moon, though, brought trouble. That was the night when the man from the bar chose to appear on their doorstep, friends in tow, looking for revenge. What they didn't expect was to be interrupted by a wolf emerging from the trees while they dragged the man out of his home into an attempt to beat him. The wolf lunged and bared her teeth, growling and snarling for them to leave. In human form, she would have been able to easily keep herself in line, but as a wolf, her emotions raged, and she attacked the threat of her love. Wolves don't think like people do, and in that moment she was only concerned with saving her husband. Truly, she didn't expect to cause more harm than a scare, but in the end, 3 men lay in the grass, bloody and torn, while the wolf swallowed blood and flesh. The young couple disappeared after that. They couldn't return to their families, and they couldn't stay in that town any longer. They knew that. The thought of killing his beloved was unbearable. So they made a plan to keep her chained and locked up during the dangerous wolf nights. They swore to each other that they would do anything to protect one another. What Evangeline did not know was that not only a wolf has a change in appetite, but also the person changes. Over the course of several months, she became harsh and cold. She was no longer the same loving and warm woman she had once been. If asked, she might not even have been able to explain why she was still with this man, when her love for him had died that night with the man she killed. Her husband, though, felt responsible for keeping her safe. It became more and more apparent that she was hungry for the unspeakable, and after a while she was able to convince him that she could be allowed to roam free as a wolf. He didn't trust her at first, but when there were no reports of animal attacks on nights that she was gone, he began to believe that maybe she did have some sort of control. She did have some sort of control, yes, but only to the extent that she would stalk a victim as a human, and then as a wolf she would kill them. By stalking them during the days, she was able to keep her mind trained. After being on the run for almost another full year, they came across an abandoned house outside of a large city. The man was tired and heartbroken, having found out of the truth of her hands long ago. They agreed to stay put in that house and even fixed up the basement to it might contain her. As they worked together to create a livable home, they started to fall in love with each other again. Hope was once again found in his eyes, and there were moments where she looked at him as if she loved him again. Perhaps she did still love him in some way. Finally, the day came that she wrapped her arms around him. She hadn't done it in such a long time. She looked deep into his eyes and told him that she loved him too. For 3 months after, everything seemed right in the world once more. He stopped dreading her skills and even helped her pick out places where she could find prey. They agreed it would be only people who wouldn't be missed or noticed, but also held some sort of evil in their hearts. Evangeline tried to stick to their code, but it proved difficult for her. Living on the edge of a city brought too many temptations, and her hunger continued to grow. Disappearances began being reported, and grisly murders were being discovered. Body parts torn up in odd places, and it began to be suspected that a serial killer was on the loose. And with each morning, the guilt grew and weighed heavily on her heart and mind. One kill was no longer enough for a month. She had progressed to killing 3 or 4 in a single night. Realizing the dangers of her roaming free, they began chaining her in the basement on nights she would turn. They even furnished the room with a comfortable bed that she would take on it, not feel like a prisoner in their own home. It worked for 2 months, but in the 3rd month, she was able to break the chains and escaped to haunt the streets of the city. Evangeline's husband heard the crash of the window breaking and rushed to follow the wolf. Armed with more chains, and if need be, a large silver knife to protect himself from the woman he loved, he found her over the still twitching body of a teenager. The dart left the gun and a small sound. The wolf's ear shifted with the noise, and she turned to face her human lover. In a flash, the dart lodged itself into her chest while she pounced on the new threat. He threw an arm in front of his face as he was knocked on the ground, while on his back, her forearm lodged in the beast's mouth. He struggled to grip 2 more darts in his free hand. The darts fell away, and as the wolf began to yank his arm from its socket, he grabbed the only thing he knew could save him, the silver blade. The knife pressed through the fur and skin easier than he thought it would. The jaws of the wolf loosened as it stepped back, staggering on his feet. With a whimper, the animal locked eyes with him and fell to her side. They were no longer the eyes of a wolf, but rather the bright eyes of the woman he loved. He quickly stood and touched the wolf as her eyes closed. She wasn't dead, but he knew that it wouldn't be long before she was. He struggled much but managed to bring the wolf back to their home and into the basement. The sun was rising as her eyes opened again and she took a deep breath. It destroyed him to see her naked form lying on the floor, knife still in her chest. She tried to get up, but was weak from blood loss. With one arm, he helped her the best he could, and soon she was lying on the bed. Through a short tear-soaked conversation, she told him this was necessary. She thanked him for loving her and said how she was glad he was the one to do this. She guided his hand around the knife and told him that he needed to sink it deeper into the chest. To be sure, her heart was pierced through it in order for the wolf to die with her. He begged her not to make him do this. He pleaded with her not to leave him. In the end, though, he looked into her eyes one last time as his hand, still covered by hers, was pushed into her body. I stopped speaking and focused my gaze on the empty fireplace. This story always broke my heart. That was this house, wasn't it? Penelope asked after a moment of silence. Her speech was quiet and sad, heavily affected by the tale. I cleared my throat and looked at her again. Yes. Yes, it was this house. The bed in the basement is still even there. But there is no ghost. Evangeline did not return from the grave. Can I see it? She asked me. My eyes narrowed, and I felt myself harden, slightly taken aback by the request. After holding my breath for 3 seconds, I let out a sigh and nodded. I suppose so. Follow me, and I'll finish my story while we walk, I said, standing up. Finish the story? But she died, Penelope said, while following me. Yes, but the man lived, I answered, and began leading her through the hall and to the door at the end of the house that opened to a staircase down. He was bitten by one who was. It didn't take but a month for him to understand what that meant, and once he turned the first time, he knew how much of a curse it really was. His body snapped and bent, bones broke and moved. He felt like he was dying. When it was done, though, he felt the freedom of running. So that's what he did. He ran. As a human and as a wolf, he ran through cities and towns. He crossed rivers and oceans, countries and continents. He hated what he was, but he used it to his advantage. You see, Penelope, a wolf has an excellent sense of smell, and werewolves have their own sort of scent. One werewolf can sniff out another easily, and there seems to be a sort of a sense, even when in a human form. Very few things on the planet can mask the sense or the specific scent of a fellow wolf. He taught himself the ways of tracking and hunting. He vowed that he would spend his life making up the mistakes he had made with Evangeline. He allowed her to kill humans, to roam free, to tear apart families. He blamed the wolf in her and the wolf in himself for everything that had done wrong. So he herded them. He turned his curse into a tool, and he traveled the world, searching out and destroying any werewolf he could find. The work took a toll on him, though. He couldn't enjoy traveling the world without Evangeline, and finally he decided to return to his home country, tired, weathered, and ready to disappear. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and I turned on the light. With the illumination of the room, a closed door could be seen on the opposite wall. I stopped halfway to it when I realized that Penelope's footsteps were no longer behind me. I turned to face her and saw fire in her eyes. And what about Evangeline's family? What about that baby sister? Did the man ever tell them what happened? She asked through gritted teeth. Her hands were at her sides, one in a fist and one gripping a pistol. I remained calm as I answered with a sorrowful tone. No, Penelope, I never saw or spoke to her family again. And why not? Didn't we deserve to have the truth? Did you know that my father spent years looking for her, only to find out that she was dead? Did it even cross your mind about how her little sister would grow up hearing stories on a sibling she would never get to meet? A sibling that was stolen from her. How hard do you think I had to fight for my own freedom? And what about her body? Did you even bury her? She demanded. I sighed and gestured to the door. Do you want to see her room? Penelope didn't answer, only glared and watched me cross the rest of the room. I opened the door and stepped inside. After a moment, she joined me and stood in the doorway. I watched her face twist and change. As she beheld the sight, I approached the bed and touched the corpse that still remained on it. You're so cold. I addressed the body. It was decayed, but still somehow intact. What the hell? I heard Penelope whisper from behind me. I came back when I heard that people claimed the house was haunted. I said aloud to my wife, You know, I want to hate you for everything that happened. You made me fall in love. You made me hope. You made me into the monster that I became. And then you left me. Tears welled up in my eyes and I knelt next to the bed. I hadn't been able to come back here since moving back. Seeing her body again after so long, I could no longer contain myself. I wanted there to be a ghost. I've begged for hours to hear her voice one more time. I've cried out and pleaded, but she never came. That's how I know that the house is not haunted. Oh, how I wish it was. That was the last thing I wanted in this world, I told Penelope without turning to even look at her. You don't deserve that, she said in a flat tone. No, I suppose you're right. I came back to die. I wanted a sign that she was still here so I could die in peace. But no. But lo and behold, I return and hear not only whispers of a ghost that doesn't exist, but also rumors of a wild animal on the loose. I couldn't say goodbye to this world with the knowledge that there was another wolf on the loose. So here I still am, at least for the moment. Did you really think you covered up your tracks that well? I asked her, finally looking into those eyes that were almost the exact replica of Evangeline's. She raised the pistol to be level with my head. Doesn't matter. You're not leaving this room. I jumped up and grabbed the knife that had been at home in a corpse for the past 19 years. The gun fired as I lunged at her. Her mistake was that I even wanted to survive past the hour. I didn't, but I would take her down with me. The pain hit me just as I shoved the blade into her heart. Her eyes widened as she dropped the gun and then fell in a heap. I let my own body fall and felt warm blood pool around me. I begged one last time to hear Evangeline's voice as I closed my eyes ready to die. She made a mistake though. Penelope didn't use silver bullets and she wasn't a good shot, even at such a short distance. The hole just below my shoulder healed quickly, the wolf in me ensuring survival. And now, a month later, I find myself writing this. Perhaps I feel the need to confess. I've taken countless lives, and honestly, I don't regret the ones I've handed. The only death I wish I could have changed is that of Evangeline. I don't want you to worry though. If you bear this curse, I'm done with hunting, I'm done with killing, I'm tired, and although I have lived a short time, my life has been too long. I think it is time to say goodbye and use that silver knife one last time. For a year, I proved that there was no ghost in this house. For a year, I wandered my home, wishing there was, but never hearing her. I dream of her though, almost every night, and finally her voice has begun to whisper to me in my waking hours. She does not cry, and she does not tell me she loves me. She is angry, and I know that there will be no escaping her wrath now. I am 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So, I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail. While talking on the phone with my boyfriend, I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed. While opening the mail, while using the phone, I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under my bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still, with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I could not see his face. And he didn't see me. Trying to be rational, while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out of my window and called the police. They told me not to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out of the door of the apartment complex. This was during summer, and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car, while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend, and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys, and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out, holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept into my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. Let me tell you this, I am not afraid of sleeping. In fact, it's probably the best thing in my schedule. I used to take 3-hour-long naps, completely wiping off any productive activity that I had that day. It's really a luxury. There's something that haunts me in my dreams. I know what a nightmare is. I used to get them all the time. Creepy crawlers and monsters were usually at the top of the list. What I saw in my dream wasn't a monster, but I wish it was. Has anyone ever told you that ghosts aren't real? Don't be silly, ghosts can hurt you. Well, guess what? They are liars. They lie to protect you from the truth. Because if you don't believe in ghosts, ghosts can't harm you. I wish someone told me that ghosts weren't real. What I am about to tell you isn't a spooky ghost story that I made up on the spot. It's a warning. Ghost stories are there to lead you away from what real ghosts are like. They're not white and floating beings. They are much, much worse than that. It happened when I was 22, and I had just finished a boring early morning lecture. I was ready to take a long and well-needed nap, so I got to my dorm, told my roommate not to disturb me, and then I went to my room. It was a mess as always. I mean, without my mom there to tell me to clean it every other week, I haven't really been keeping tabs on the cleaners. I lied to myself that I was going to clean it tomorrow. Then I hopped into bed without changing. I closed my eyes and I drifted off in an instant. After a few hours, I woke up. Or, at least I thought I did. Everything looked the same. No temperature changes either. I thought I had just woken up in a normal room. See, I didn't have a very keen eye. I didn't really realize any immediate changes. I was naive. I left my room and started for a bowl of cereal. That was when I looked out the kitchen window. It was dark, unusually dark. In fact, the kind of dark you would see if you close your eyes. There was no moon, and no clouds, and no lamps. My kitchen window has a clear view of the university, and I often like to watch people going about their day. It was always brightly lit, and watching people head back to their dorm rooms, tired and probably drunk, amused me. The university was not there. This sparked me as odd. I mean, the university was always there, and the lights could probably be seen from space. I put my bowl on the counter and took a closer look. The university was gone, but something else replaced it. I couldn't see it before, because it blended in with the darkness. It was a person. It was my roommate. He was the only thing around, for as far as I can see, and he had to at least be half a mile away. He almost completely blended in, apart from his eyes. A bright green that wasn't right. His eyes were brown, not green. Maybe it wasn't my roommate. I mean, the figure looked like him, but I'm not sure. A lot of people had the same figure. That's when he pointed at me. He stretched his hand and pointed straight at the window. Something wasn't right. His arm was stretching further and further towards my window. That was when the screams came. With every inch he stretched his arm, the blood-curdling, ear-piercing screams were swung at me like a bag of rocks hitting my stomach. I got thrown back just by the waves of sound. Actually, no. I could see the waves emitting from his mouth, waves of blood. The window was closed, but it came through just as easily, as if it were air. I instinctively ran to my room, but no matter where I went, the scream followed. There was no window in my room. The only room in the house with no window. I had to be safe here. I heard the kitchen glass shatter. I peered through the cracks in my bedroom door, but my roommate... No, that thing must have turned the goddamn lights off. My room thankfully was still lit. I reached for my phone in my drawer and dialed the police. I didn't even know what they would do, but I dialed them anyway. That's what you're supposed to do, right? The operator picked up. Police, fire services, or ambulance? She asked in a cheerful manner. Police, police, please! I replied, my voice hoarse. Don't be rude, sir, the operator responded. What? Look, okay, someone is in my dorm. I don't know where I am or what's happening, I replied again, shocked that she had called me rude. What the hell is going on here? Sir, the voice was different now, and louder and clearer, and a lot deeper like a growl. Don't be rude. And that's when I realized what had happened. The screams had stopped, and all I heard from the other side was, Now, I'll ask you again. Police, ambulance, or fire services. The door burst open. The figure was standing in my room. The light had busted, and now I was standing there. I threw my phone at the wall in shock, probably cracking it. The entity stood with the same finger, pointing at me. That was when I woke up. I was sweating all over. It was a nightmare, I thought. It was all a nightmare. I opened my eyes. The door was fine. It was light outside. I checked next door to find my roommate on his PS4. All was fine. The clock had stopped working a few days before, so I went to check the drawer to find my phone. It wasn't there. In the corner of my room was my old phone. cracked in several places. I turned it on. There was a single black line of text on a grey background. 2 words that have haunted me to this day. Sweet dreams. Every summer, my aunt, uncle, and younger cousin go on a vacation for about 5 days. In the more recent years, they have started asking me to house sit for them. They have a 2-story house in a nice neighborhood. It has 2 basements, a basement and a cellar though, so I guess you could say it's 4 levels altogether. I live there with their dog and cat, take care of the house and flowers, and pretty much relax. The first few days were awesome, just going on walks with Jewel, the dog, and laying around watching TV, maybe the occasional tanning session. With my best friend outside, I was making money too. How could I complain? Well, around day 3, my best friend Sam was spending the night. We were having some wine and watching a hilarious show. Around 11, we decided to go to sleep, as we were both pretty exhausted and she had to be up early. She took the guest room and I slept directly across the hall in my aunt and uncle's. We both left our doors open, so with the lights on, we could see one another. We put the lights out and Jewel and I lay down. Within 5 minutes, I hear Sam scream and bolt to turn on her light. I sit up. What the hell? There's something scratching the wall, she yelled, backing out of the guest room into the hallway. Sam's super paranoid, so I wasn't too concerned with her reaction. It's not the first time she's sworn she heard something. It's probably just Tinkerbell, the cat, I reassure her. Well, can you just take a look? So I walk into the room. Jewel follows me to the bed. I kneel down and looked under. There is absolutely no way a human could fit under this bed, but I have known the cat to hide under there from time to time. This time, though, there's nothing there but shoe boxes for storage. Look, it's nothing, not even the cat. You're just hearing things. Again. I tell her. Sam knows she can be overly paranoid. So she kinda laughs and gets back into bed, not super concerned anymore. I was back to my room and I see the light turned off behind me. Before I can even get comfortable, Sam screams again and runs straight into my room yelling, "No, I'm not kidding. There's something in there. It's scratching the walls." This time I got a little nervous. It's not like her to freak out that badly. She may say she hears something, but she doesn't generally run around yelling. I turn the hallway light on and walk into the guest room, flipping that switch up as well. I put on a hard face and pretend she's just being silly. I tell her to look under the bed and I'll lift it up, hoping that I maybe just didn't see the cat behind the boxes. I lift the bed and she sees nothing. No cat, just boxes. I look around the room a little. We didn't find anything. Now she refuses to go back to bed in here. Instead, she sleeps in my cousin's room down the hall. While I'm a little freaked out about how she is reacting, I climb back into bed, telling myself that it's nothing and she's only being like this because it's an unfamiliar place to her. Jewel decides to join her in my cousin's room. So, I am alone, a little shaken up. I hold the covers over my head. I am exhausted. Just before I drift off, I think I hear the closet slide open. Like a child hearing a monster, I hold the covers tighter and wait to fall asleep. The next day, we barely discuss the happenings of the night. Sam goes home. I am back to being myself. As the day gets later, my mind is slowly distracted away from even thinking about last night. The neighbors bring their dog over to play in the backyard with Jewel. We chat for a while. They take their dog back once it starts getting dark. I can tell Jewel is a little bummed to see her friend leave. Finally, it's dark. Jewel and I are all cozied up on the couch, watching TV again. The phone rings. I answer. Hello? Hey, Alfalfa. It's Sandra from across the street. I just wanted to let you know that the garage door is open. That's strange. I don't even have a car. It definitely hadn't been opened this morning. Weird. Oh, all right. Well, thanks. I'll shut that, I reply. We hung up, and I head outside in the dark to close the door. My mind is running through the day over and over, finding no answer to how and when it would have been opened. I don't question it too much though, trying not to scare myself. I go back inside, locking the door behind me. I go to the front and lock that door too. Then it's back to the same old, Joel and I hanging on the couch. The doorbell rings. Now, who is at the door at 9:15 p.m.? I don't live in this neighborhood, and most of the neighbors are aware that my aunt and uncle are out of town. So I look out the peephole. A pizza delivery guy? He's standing there, look kinda nervous. I crack the door, just enough to ask him what the deal is. I think maybe he got lost. Pizza for this address? He says, smiling. I'm sorry, but I didn't order a pizza. Kinda giving him a weird face. I can tell that makes him a little nervous, like maybe he's new to the job and worried he'll be in trouble for messing this up. A large cheese pizza? Did someone order it for you maybe? He says, clearly worried now. Not that I know of. Is it paid for? I asked. Well, no. Sorry. I'm new, I don't really know how to handle this situation. He replies. I smell the pizza and my stomach kinda grumbles a little bit. It's probably one of my cousin's friends, trying to prank her, but getting me instead. I feel sorry for the guy, so I dish out a few bucks and just let him off easy. He apologizes for the mix-up, adding, if you want to find out where the pizza came from, I don't have the number on me, but you can call the restaurant and ask to look it up for you. All right, no problem. Have a nice night, I say as I shut the door. So I have the pizza, but I'm still really curious. I figure I'll just call the place and get the number so I can tell my cousin which of her friends was pranking her. The line's ringing and I am waiting anxiously, because the more I smell that sweet combination of cheese and sauce, the hungrier I'm getting. Mario's Pizzeria, how can I help you? I explain my situation to the guy on the phone, who happens to be the manager. Oh, no problem, ma'am. Let me just look that right up. I sit listening to him fumbling around, looking up the number. I hear an aha, as he finds it, then begins to recite the digits back to me. I feel my stomach tense as my appetite leaves me. My hands begin to shake and my eyes stink. The call came from inside the house. The nurse entered the room about 5 that evening and listened to the low hum of the heart monitor, flatlining. She ran over to the machine and checked it to be sure, then turned to me and my wife and then lowered her head apologetically. Would you like me to call someone? She asked. I stood up and then nodded before answering. Reverend Patrick. I have his number as one of my emergency contacts. The nurse gave me a soft hug and then left the room, gently closing the door so that only silence filled the air between my wife and I. After we were certain she was gone, my wife walked over toward me. She is really gone, isn't she? Vanessa whispered. It was inevitable, I told her. Was it? Was there anything else we could have done differently, Robert? She asked. I helped her gather the gifts as the doctor returned with a chart. Mr. and Mrs. Colton? I'm Dr. Hendricks, he said. We waited beside the bed as he placed the chart back down. I'm curious about your daughter's condition. It seemed as though the chances of improving with chemotherapy were almost 76%. Hendricks stated. God wanted another angel, Vanessa said with a sigh. If you don't mind, I wanted to perform an autopsy on her body, he said. I frowned and snapped back. You want to cut our little angel open? It is standard procedure. Vanessa frowned. Her face went white. But there was nothing we could do. The nurse returned a few moments later and they took her body. Robert, Vanessa said as she squeezed my hand. I know, I muttered. I knew what they would find when they performed the procedure. We need to leave, she insisted. The reverend isn't here yet, I told her. They are going to lock us up, she said, frantically. I held her close as she started to cry. I hate you, she snarled as she pushed me away. I couldn't find any words to say except, the reverend will make this better. He's a good man. Less than 10 minutes later, the doctor returned. Mrs. Colton, may I speak to you privately? Hendricks asked. Whatever you have to say, you can say it to both of us. I snapped. Very well then. It would seem we found traces of arsenic in your daughter's bloodstream. There was also indication of bruising around her neck, Hendricks said. My wife could not hold back her nervousness anymore. Those marks are from my hand, doctor, Vanessa said, as she sobbed bitterly. Hendricks seemed taken aback by her confession and said, If you wish to make a statement, I can contact the police immediately. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. My husband had nothing to do with this. The team of nurses left hurriedly to call the authorities. Vanessa and I were alone again as I squeezed her hand again. A mix of emotions floated over me. Why are you doing this? I asked. Someone has to dispose of the body, Robert, she snapped back. About 5 minutes later, the hospital security arrived and escorted her from the room. All of them looked at me as though I were to blame as well, if only they knew. When Reverend Patrick got there, he was carrying his bag in his right hand and his Bible in his left. Robert, I was hoping Vanessa would be here, he remarked softly as he closed the door. Circumstances have changed, I replied. Is this where it happened? He asked, staring at the empty hospital bed. Yes, I'm sorry to ask this of you, but there isn't much time, I said. My son, he paused and put his hand on my shoulder. God always makes time for his children. He took out some soft white powder, and as he sprinkled it around the bed, he chanted a simple song. To whom shall I give this baby? There isn't much to say. I'll give it to the hollow man, who plague us day by day. Sleep now, dear child, and go run and play. Play in God's garden, where hollow men dare not stray. Then he took out a small knife. Take this, he told me. I looked at the sharp blade and nodded, knowing my job was almost done. I slept there in the room for another hour until the doctor returned for me to fill out paperwork. Will I be able to take my daughter home? I asked him. The coroner has already taken her. Hendricks responded. What? Where? I asked frantically. I pushed the paperwork back into his hands. I need to be there, I insisted. He wrote out the address for the funeral home, and I drove as quick as I could to find it. They were already embalming her body when I arrived. You have to stop, I shouted. The funeral director looked at me like I was a madman. Please, just let me see her, I begged him. He nodded quietly and led me to the room where they had started the process. I need a few moments alone, I told him. The director closed the old rusty door and I stared down at my young daughter. There was no time to delay. I plunged the knife over and over again into her body, laughing as I did, crying as I struck her corpse over and over until I was finished. My clothes were covered with blood. When the director returned and saw me, He shouted for someone to call the police. I let the knife clatter to the floor as I waited for them. When they took me to the station, they asked me what my reasons were for doing something like this. I remained quiet as they questioned me until at last they realized I refused to speak. "We can only charge you for being an accessory to a crime and disturbing a body," the police chief finally said. They would never believe me if I told them the truth anyway. When I got home the next morning after spending the night in jail, Patrick was awaiting for me outside my house. "Thank you for providing my bail," I told him. "Are you ready?" he asked. We went down to my daughter's room to clean up her things. First, we started sweeping, decluttering the scattered bones that were across the floor. I took a mop and wet the head before trying to scrub the blood stains. The reverend took a rag and helped me lift the chains into it. When we were done, it looked like a normal house again, like our nightmare was finally over. "How long will Vanessa have to stay in prison?" Patrick asked. "The trial is pending. She wanted one of us to at least move on with our lives," I answered. "You did the right thing, Robert," he told me. I thanked him as I left. Then I sat down and stared at the pictures, the ones she made us take. I could hear her laughing as we were forced to do her every chore. "I'm finally free," I said as I listened to the silence in my house. I started to fall asleep, the first time in ages. When I awoke, I burned the pictures. I didn't want any memories. I was done with the whole thing. She was our whole world once, and we just wanted to see that world burn. I slept a few more hours and was finally awakened by the phone. At this hour, I thought it was just a prank. "Who is this?" I asked angrily. On the other end, I heard a soft giggle that made my hair stand on end. I hung up the phone quickly and began to sob bitterly into my hands. Maybe I will never be free. I guess I should start off saying this. Working at a gas station is easy, especially if it's one in the middle of nowhere. And as a college student, it's not too easy finding a job that pays great, and that's super quiet customer-wise. I'm not a lazy person, but if given the opportunity to put something off, it might just be done later. I think the best work is the work done later by someone else. The name is David, by the way. A lot of people call me Dave, for short. It was around 1 a.m. I couldn't quite remember when the people just stopped coming for the night. It's almost always midnight when things start to grind to a halt. I'm supposed to lock the pumps for the night because of recent people trying to quickly fill up and dash away. However, my boss was tired of having to send someone out to unlock the cover and relock it after. As long as money is made, then everything is fine. It isn't even a lock, just a flimsy meat cover for the pump that provided the same amount of security as kissing a scrape of a knee. I considered looking it regardless, since he wasn't here, and I figured that nobody else would come by. But knowing the boss man, he would somehow figure out that I was locking it and get me in trouble for losing potential profit. I think it was around 3 a.m. when a couple of kids came in. They went to the back, checking the other aisles to see if there was something, presumably to fuel their adventure. The only problem I had was that the back was the only place I couldn't see and would actually have to walk over if I suspect trouble. A couple minutes passed and they still hadn't come back from the last shelf. I started to walk over when I heard a car pulling up. I was split between taking care of a new customer or making sure the boys weren't fooling around. I decided to walk back to the counter and figured the kids would come up when they were ready. I looked outside as the rusted crimson car came to a stop and its driver came out. They went to the pump and stopped, not even pulling it from its slot. I moved from my stool and went to the door, opening it slightly. I was greeted with the sound of crickets and the wind swaying the grass. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need help?" My voice seemed to carry much longer and further than I had meant. I was given no response and felt that that was an answer to my question. He or she would come and ask me if they needed anything. I already was neglecting the till, so going out and helping would be pushing it by far. I returned to my old post and sat on my stool, waiting for the kids to come up. Minutes passed by, and the store was almost as quiet as the outside. The silence was only interrupted by the hum of the old fan. Surely the kids had found what they were looking for. It doesn't take long to find a Pepsi or some chips to fuel your mission to see the sunrise. I was getting uneasy. My boss doesn't like customers that linger unnaturally long, and I shared that sentiment. Once again, I left the comfort of the till and walked by the front doors. The person seemed to be jingling the pump. At least there was a feeling of relief that they were acting normal. Just another customer dealing with our palms. I came to a stop at the final shelf at the back, not wanting to scare the kids and trying to identify if there was something off taking so long. I hated having to act like that. I was security and checking on suspicious customers, but things sometimes need to be done. I heard a bit of chatter. "Have you heard about the gasoline man?" a young boy's voice asked, presumably to the other boys, who were acting as his audience. "No." "Is he scary?" another voice piped up. "Yes, and I'll tell you why," responded the storyteller. "Back when this station was being built, some old hobo that wasn't hurting nobody died after he got in a fight with some of the guys that built places, and he accidentally fell and pulled a hose with some gasoline, and next thing you know, he went up in flames. They say it was 'cause how hot it was when they were fighting. Unfortunately, that part is somewhat reasonable and explains why the gas station construction was delayed for a few weeks. In fact, most of the people that knew about the legend agreed too. He wasn't doing nothing, he just wanted to have a place to stay. People say that he still comes around and get back all those who stop by." The kid stopped. "Come on, you guys, let's go home now." I quickly shuffled back to the till and watched them approach. I asked if anything was all right and if they had found something they wanted to buy. "Yep, we are trying to get the gasoline man," said a blonde sun-kissed looking boy. I laughed and congratulated them on their efforts to stay up and find them. I didn't know what else to do, considering these kids seemed like they could handle themselves. As I was ringing them up, the bell dinged, and I heard the door open. Looking up, I saw the figure that was outside earlier trying to fill up their car. They came to the counter, waiting for the boys, and then came closer to the till and me. He reeked of cigarettes and looked like he had been just completely soaked in something. Perhaps I'm better off not knowing. I attempted to block out the smell, but it wormed itself back into my nostrils every time I dipped my nose below my shirt. It was more intense than cigs, like a burnt steak kind of smell. He barely spoke, only ever speaking to make sure he got everything he needed, which wasn't much. Some water and a pack of cigs, which explains the smell a bit. When he spoke, I felt like I was listening to something you weren't supposed to. On the other hand, it had been a long night, it had to have been, considering that I got there at 9 p.m. I looked towards the clock after ringing him up. In red digital form, it read 5:12 a.m. Lovely, only an hour left till I could go home. I returned my gaze back down and noticed that the man hadn't moved much. In fact, he seemed to be moving closer. "Excuse me, sir, is there anything else I can do for you?" My question went unanswered, and instead, he grew closer. I moved my hand under the desk to grab the old mallet. "Please step back a little, sir." I unsuccessfully tried asking him. His smell reeked even more, and now I noticed that the kids were poking around in his car. Almost in an instant, I saw him switch from looking at me to dashing to his car. I ran to the till to call the police in an attempt to try and at least get the situation calmed. I looked outside and saw the man roughly grab the tanned boy and shake him. "I swear it wasn't us, mister. Please, we didn't do nothing wrong." The kid nearly screamed at him. I heard this ear-piercing scream, like someone mixed a baby screeching, and nails being dragged across a new chalkboard. I nearly jumped up. This kid was being strangled by this guy, while his friends screamed out for someone. I finally got an operator and told them as much as I could. I hung up fast, despite what they said, and ran towards the kid to help. With a twist of misfortune, I tripped as I was running out. It hurt. It really hurt. I looked down and noticed the ground was wet, slick with a film of something. Whatever it was made getting up even harder. I stood up and saw the kid almost being forced into the wall beside the gasoline pumps. "Mister, I ain't done nothing. I'm sorry," he cried while being pushed into the wall. The gruff man didn't listen and instead pulled him closer and grabbed a pump. "Listen, kiddo, I'm gonna stick your fingers in this, every single one." I ran to him and I nearly stopped as I heard the process and saw the results of it. His fingers started to just pop. I got closer towards the palm, but by the time I got there, his arm was like a bloody piñata. I tried pushing this hulking mass of a man to move, but he wouldn't budge. I yelled at him, trying to get his attention to me, only to be ignored and unable to shake him. The kids had been reduced to crying and whimpering, too scared to scream. I tried telling them to calm down while I figured out what to do, but my voice seemed to be drowned out and hidden away by the man in front of me. I pushed the man one final time, only to witness the true state this kid was in. I knew I couldn't do anything. His arm was stuck and there was no question about it. I began to feel sick when the realization dawned on me that he had stopped screaming. I shielded the kids while I felt the terrorizer try and get past. I shook the kid from the third time and he woke for a second. That was almost enough to get me to feel better. The kid started to cough, violently cough. To say that lying to a dying kid was painful wouldn't quite cut it. "Come on, buddy, we'll fix you up. Just try to take a nap, okay?" I told him. The man behind me finally grabbed me, pushing me out of the way. I saw the kid cough more and more until a bit of black, slimy thing managed its way out onto his abuser's clothes. I quickly looked at it, and I began to realize that he was spitting out oil. More and more started to drip from the poor kid's mouth. I heard the sound of police cars approaching in the distance, and I hopelessly tried getting to the other kids. They started to scream again about both their friends and themselves as I saw this hobo begin to push them into getting close to the pumps. I pulled on him to get away. Hearing the sound of police sirens come even closer, he turned to look at me. He pushed me, and I felt his entire hands burn. He came closer, and he grabbed me. His embrace burned me. It was like I was touching a hot pan. I fainted after only a few seconds of the searing pain. I can't remember much after that. I remember being walking to the sound of hospital equipment. I took a look around, pinching myself to catch if I was dreaming. I nearly started to cry as it dawned on me that it wasn't a dream. I lived it. I looked toward my IV bag, and for just a second, I thought I saw a drop of oil. I don't know if I am reading too much no sleep and it's messing with my brain, or if I have a legitimate reason to be scared, but either way, the paranormal scares the shit out of me, and I am scared right now. I need advice because I don't know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go, and the baby is asleep and my husband is at work. We bought and moved into this house in October. All was well for quite some time. I never truly got the feeling of being home, though, for some reason. I have always had a very uneasy feeling at night time here. When my husband is here, I don't notice it as much, but when I'm here alone with the kids, I feel very uneasy, like I am not safe, no matter whether all doors and windows are locked or not. A couple months into living here, I started hearing things. You know how when someone does a particular thing in your house all the time, like opening the refrigerator, closing a certain door, you learn to recognize those sounds? I started hearing normal noises like someone else was in the house with me, except there was no one else but me and the kids were asleep. The first time was when I heard the loudest bang come from the kids' bathroom. That sounded like someone knocked into the trash can. Our dog picked his head up. After that noise, I heard more banging coming from my bedroom, which is in the back corner of the house. Zachary started growling. I was terrified. I called my husband crying. He made me stay on the phone with him and grab a butcher's knife because I swore someone had broken into the house. Luckily, he was already on his way home. He works retail, so a lot of noise. He works until about 10:30 p.m. He got here and inspected inside and out, and nobody was here. Nothing was opened. It was clear that no one had broken in. A few days go by, and it's quiet. I had forgotten about it until a few nights later. I was sitting in the living room and heard someone walking in the kitchen and opened the fridge. The dog growled again. For half a second, I assumed it was my husband, and then I remembered he was at work. I froze. I didn't know what to do. It was still early, about 7 p.m. I would be alone here for a few more hours. Once I gathered the courage, I started to get up. I heard another noise, like someone opened the fridge, and I ran to the kitchen. I don't know why I had the courage to do that, because I was scared shitless. No one was there, and the fridge was not opened. I didn't hear anything else that night or the following few nights until things got really weird. About a week after hearing no more noises and starting to feel safe, I was watching TV one night while Matt was at work, and I hear my 5-year-old, who goes to bed at 8 p.m. every night and never has trouble sleeping or falling asleep, start crying. Before I could get all the way to her door, she was coming out, hysterically crying. She could not form a full sentence, but said that my husband was going to kill her. A few minutes later, she said that I was going to kill her. This really worried me. She's never talked like that before, and we aren't violent people. We don't allow her to watch an adult television that has any sort of violence. So, I have absolutely no clue where that came from. She's not in school either. She starts in August. She continued to have this episode almost every night. She would not talk much anymore though when she woke up crying. She would just cry and cry until we got her to lay back down and go to sleep. Now, let me say, I realize that some kids have night terrors, but what struck me as odd is the timing of when they started and the things she said to me that very first night. She still have this night terror sometimes. For a while, I wasn't hearing much, but slowly the noises have come back again. Tonight, my 5-year-old is spending the night off, and husband is at work, and I'm home alone with the baby. I was playing some Super Nintendo after the baby went to bed, and out of nowhere, I heard footsteps in the kitchen again, and my dog sat up and looked in the direction of the kitchen. We sat in silence for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Right as I'm about to play again, I heard the sound of my front door opening. Even though I knew it was locked, my dog is uneasy. He's growling. I jumped up and checked the front door, and it's locked and there's no one outside. Suddenly, the baby wakes up crying, which is not unusual, so I went into her room to put her back to sleep. I shut her door just enough to leave a crack of light and picked her up, sat in the rocking chair with her, and started browsing Facebook. She finally falls asleep, and I quietly lay my phone down so I can stand up and put her back in the bed. But before I could stand up, I see something that looks like a shadow run past the door. There is someone there. For that, I am certain. I put the baby back in the crib and I slowly opened the door. I see no one. I went to the kitchen to check if everything is okay. And then I see it. A black figure of a man standing there. The figure was all black, except his eyes. Its eyes were bright red, glowing, staring at me, like they were staring inside my soul. I don't remember anything after that. I think I faded, and I hit my head while I was falling to the ground. 'Cause the next thing that I remember, laying in bed with my husband next to me, and the baby in my arms. It must have been a nightmare, right? Yeah, that's all what it was. I am typing this up in the police station right now. Just got done with my third round of questions. This happened last night, and needless to say, I still can't fully process what happened, so I will write it down and see if it helps. A week ago, I moved into my first student home for university. I took a year off, worked my hands to the bone, and managed to scrape enough cash to get a nice town home with my roommates and enough spending money to put in a little furniture. I moved 10 hours away from my small town on the outskirts of butt-fuck nowhere and absolutely nothing. So I was pretty excited to experience life in the big city. I ordered my stuff online, and instead of shipping it to my new house, they dumped it off of the front lawn of my childhood home instead. I was pissed and about to make the trip down to collect what I could when the news broke out that there was a prison break. The only interesting thing about my little town was the asylum, nestled deep in the forest that surrounded where I grew up. It wasn't a funny farm. This place was for the worst of the worst. The cannibals, the violently deranged, all were collected in the crumbling brick building hidden deep inside an evergreen forest. Apparently, a journalist snuck in one day and documented the rampant abuse the inmates suffered at the place and brought it to the authorities. They rushed in and shut the place down around the same time I was signing my acceptance letters. As I was moving out, they were in the process of relocating the prisoners and slapping the staff in iron. They saved the most violent for last, and a little mix-up resulted in 4 of the lunatics jumping a guard and escaping into the night. I decided to stay put until they captured the crazies that were running loose where I grew up, and I managed to convince my parents to stuff my furniture in the garage and skip down until they were all locked up. After about a week, they managed to round up 3 of the 4 and decided that the last one was long gone. So I headed back home. I got to my house and saw that the place was ransacked. Money was stolen, and shit was just in general torn up. Bastards even stole our dog. My family suspected it was one of the escaped mental patients, but the police claimed that since valuables were stolen, it was just a general robbery, and there was nothing to worry about. I made sure they had someone watching the home anyway, and began the long drive back to my new home. I began decorating my place the second I got back. I am a fairly sizable guy, so moving the furniture by myself was not a big deal. But the wardrobe felt like a million tons. I said fuck it and left it in the truck. I was exhausted and it wasn't going anywhere. The next day, I went outside to see a guy I didn't recognize sitting on my truck. I yelled out hello and he introduced himself as David, my neighbor. We immediately hit it off and he offered to help me move the rest of my stuff in. We both of us lifting the wardrobe and we dropped it right in my room. I ordered a pizza and offered to share a beer with the guy later. He happily agreed but said he didn't do bar or clubs. He didn't look like a bar guy, so I laughed it off, offered to keep the night low-key. He came over later and we began drinking. For someone who didn't like bars, he drank his weight in beer in half the time I did, and continued to pressure me to catching up. By 11 p.m., I was tipsy to the point of falling over, so I called it a night. He seemed disappointed, but I promised next week I'd drink him under the table, and that lifted his spirits. I collapsed in my bed and swiftly passed out. I slept like a log until 2 a.m., when a loud thumping from David's house woke me up. Dizzy and still not fully sober, I stumbled to the bathroom and tried to get some water in my system. I had drunk my fill when a soft click made me jerk my head back to my room. 2 more hollow clicks shot an arrow of anxiety into my gut. It didn't sound like someone trying to break in, nor did it sound like someone tapping on a window. It went silent for a while. Adrenaline filtered the remaining alcohol of my system, and I tiptoed downstairs to grab something to eat to calm my nerves. My countertop was a bloody mess. The raw beef I had in the freezer was everywhere, and there were these weird pink and red scraps all over the floor and counter. I was in the middle of debating whether or not an animal or a person broke in when another thump from David's house jump-startled my heart back to a runner's pace. Something was going on his house. I creeped back into my room to grab my baseball bat when I heard another click. There was no mistaking, and this one was under my bed. They began to sound wet, emitting a fleshy clunk. Each time they sounded, they were loud and frequent, speeding up every time I took a step closer. My head still foggy, I turned on my phone flashlight and dropped to the floor. My light illuminated David's face, splattered with blood, with a hollow look on his face. He seemed to completely change his look overnight. His face was gaunt, and his lips were completely pulled back. He emitted an inhuman scream and crawled like a spider from under my bed. I was in such shock, I was barely able to stop him from plunging his thumbs into my eyes. He pinned me to the wall and began gnashing his teeth in my face, each bite emitting an awful click that still resounds in my ears. We wrestled, but I was able to overpower him and send his head into my window. I only meant to stun the guy, but instead I put his head completely through it. He yelped like a wounded animal and yanked his head back through the stolen glass. His face was littered in deep cuts, blooming with crimson blood. He screamed and pulled a massive shard of glass with his bare hands from the hole in my window. We stared at each other for a second. Then he dragged the piece along his forearm, with his bloody hands licking it dry. When he was done, he leaped forward and tried to send the glass into my chest. I easily sidestepped the attempt and let him trip into the wall. I grabbed the bat and with a scream of my own, I brought it upwards, colliding with his jaw. A sickening crack filled my ears as I watched his disgusting teeth shatter and fly from his blood-filled mouth. He collapsed to the ground and I sank to my knees. I crawled to my phone and called the police, my entire body numb and terrified. As I lay staring at the broken body of my neighbor, another thump emitted from his house. I would have ignored it until I heard a hoarse voice scream for help. I tied the attacker's arms with a blanket and ran into my neighbor's house. In the master bedroom, I found the real David. He was hogtied on his bed. The skin from his fingers, toes and shins were completely flayed. As I was untying him, the cops arrived and took me and the intruder to the police station. After a couple hours, the police came back with their full statement. They identified the attacker as Carl Johnson, the one escapee that they could not find. Carl was one of the worst. He was a full-fledged cannibal and torture enthusiast, kept his victims alive for months. He broke into our house while evading the police and trashed the place to make it look like a normal robbery. Fucker even admitted to eating the family dog when he regained consciousness. He snuck into my wardrobe, and when I left in the truck, he snuck out and tied up David. He posed as him the next day to get me drunk so he could kill me in my sleep. He said he got hungry while waiting for the perfect moment to strike, so he helped himself to the raw meat I had in the freezer and some scraps of flesh that he peeled off of David. That's what got him caught. The cockiness is the only thing that stopped him from tearing me apart in my sleep. But that's not the scariest thing I found last night. Turns out Carl has a twin. just as fucked up as he was. They said only 4 broke out, but because him and his brother looked so similar, they chalked it up as only one guy. They still can't find him. So, I'm ending with this. Tonight, check under your beds, your closets. Make sure your neighbors are exactly as you remember. Because another Johnson is loose, and they are always hungry. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. And if you like my videos and want to see more, subscribe to my channel. And I will see you all in my next video.